Good. Hey, we are going to be in Acts chapter 21 if you want to jump there and stick a thumb in it. Acts chapter 21. Hey, I want to do something a little bit different this morning if we can. Anybody remember Mad Lib? Seriously? Nobody? Mad Lib. 2 people. Okay, so here's the deal. I'm going to teach you something new this morning since apparently nobody knows what this is. So there's this app I have on my phone that has Mad Libs. Basically what it is you go through and you pick different like verbs or different people, or you put in names sometimes, you put in jobs sometimes, but you just randomly pick these different things, and then it automatically puts it into a story, and you create this ridiculous story. Anybody ever done this before? Like, no, still? Okay, so here, we're just going to try it. I'm going to teach you this. We're going to do one this morning and see what kind of story we create, okay? Great, we're off to a great start. Okay, this is like interaction time. I know we don't do this very much here, but we're going to try it and see how it goes. Okay, shout it out, I need a job. Plumber. Okay, I need a name of a person, like an actual name. Terry, I heard Terry first, so that's where we're going. Okay, I need a place. Texas. I'm going with the first one I hear. You got to be quick. Okay, I need another place. Louisiana. I don't know how to spell that, so we're just going to go like this. I'm not turning this in. Here we go. All right, I need a creature. Squirrel. I need a sound. Squeak. Somebody over here is like really nailing it. I don't know who it is, but nice. All right, I need a different creature. Horse. Sound. Moo. I need a name. Different name. Hey, come on. All right, here we go. And I need a job. Airman? All right. All right, here we go. This is our story that we created together. Are you ready for this? Once upon a time, there was a plumber named Terry who lived in the kingdom of Texas. While on a walk in the enchanted Louisiana, they saw a squirrel. Squeak! It yelled. But the horse came up to them and began to moo. It wasn't mean at all. I'll call you Matt, they said. And the airman said to the airmen, and they became best friends, and they went back to live in the castle forever and ever. That's Mad Lib. Anybody ever done this before? Like 3 people? Okay. You should look it up. It is a good way to pass time with your 8-year-old daughter. Just so you know. All right, here's the thing. It's really hard to make a story powerful by accident, isn't it? It's really difficult to make a story impactful by accident, isn't it? I mean, like Mad Lib, it's just random. Like, those stories are not going to turn out well most of the time. I've listened to a few like this done, and it is sometimes much worse. Thank you for calling me out, whoever said Matt. I appreciate you, really loving on me there. It's harder even to live a story that is powerful when it's just by accident, isn't it? Like, it takes time. It takes intentionality, it takes purpose, it takes focus for us to live out our stories that really make a difference in the world, right? That really are powerful. And so the question for you this morning is your story powerful? Is your story powerful? Because here it is, meaningful and powerful stories change lives. Meaningful and powerful stories change lives around us. And stories always have a beginning, right? Stories always have a beginning. I wonder what, if your life was written into a book, what would be the opening line of your life? What would it be? Here's some openers for you. Maybe you can identify with some of these. Maybe your life would be opened like this. Her life was a hot mess. The marriage was doomed from the start. She was a victim, not a victor. The older he got, the more expensive his toys became. If only they could go back and make different choices. Nothing was ever the same after that day. They couldn't seem to get over it. They never made a difference because they were too busy making money. He was fearful, not faithful. Those are some kind of negative side, but maybe those are difficult ones, but maybe you have a positive one to start your story. Maybe it's something like he was redeemed from his past. Living with purpose never felt so good. It was the old made new. Or maybe this is yours, serving with passion whenever she could. Like maybe these are some of the ways that your story would be opened. There's a Christian author by the name of Donald Miller. He's a Christian best-selling author. He authored the book Blue Like Jazz, among many other books. He wrote this book, Blue Like Jazz, and it is basically his telling of his story in his life. He's basically accounting for his story. He writes this book, and then a few years later, some movie directors come up to him and say, hey, we would like to turn your book into a movie. And so he agrees to this, and they begin kind of working their way through the process of this. And he finds himself editing his life for a movie. Seems strange, right? Editing your life for a movie. But here's what he said in the midst of that. He said, I began to edit my life, and I found out that my life wasn't very interesting. Anybody identify with that? Find out that my life was not very interesting. Is your life interesting? Is your story interesting? Or is your story more like a Mad Lib, where it is just kind of random craziness? In a different book that Donald Miller wrote called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, this is the opening lines to that story, to that book that he said, or that he wrote. It says this: if you were to watch a movie about a guy who wanted a Volvo and worked years to get it, you wouldn't cry at the end when he drove it off the lot testing the windshield wipers. You wouldn't go out and tell your friends you saw a beautiful movie. You wouldn't go home and put on a record and think about the story you had just seen. The truth is, you wouldn't remember the movie a week later, except you would feel robbed and want your money back. Nobody cried at the end of the movie when a guy wants an expensive car, but we spend years actually living these stories and expect our lives to be meaningful. The truth is, what we choose to do with our lives won't make a story meaningful. It won't make a life meaningful either. Don't miss this. Hear these words. The truth is, our lives are stories. Our lives are stories, and how we live out our life is the story that's being told about our life. This is what he said there. I want to repeat it because it's so impactful. We spend years actually living these stories and expect our lives to be meaningful. We live our lives living these stories out, and we just think somehow randomly our lives are going to be meaningful. This week, if you're following along in the Rooted study, we're talking about our stories and making our stories meaningful in the grand picture of the gospel and in Christianity. And so my goal for today, as we kind of unpack this together, is for us to think about if we are living a meaningful life. I want us to think about if we have a meaningful story, like if somebody was following us around and writing out our story based on how we live our life, would it be meaningful? And maybe we need to find a more interesting or a more meaningful story for our lives. And I don't know about you. I don't know if you know how to tell your story or not, but maybe I can give you some pointers this morning in how to help you share your story in Christ as well. Because I want us collectively, as individuals and us as a church, to continue to find a more meaningful story. I want us to continue to find a more impactful story in the world around us. And as each of us does it individually, we can do it collectively as a church as well. And so this is where we begin. Meaningful and impactful stories, they tell stories of changed lives. They tell stories of changed lives. You are here today, I believe, because somebody shared a story with you that changed your life, right? And it was a story probably about how their life was changed by somebody else. I mean, I could share my story with you about a guy named Aaron Protz, who was my youth minister in high school. And he shared his story with me, and it was a messy story from time to time. But I am here today in a large way because of the story that Aaron Prose told to me about his life. Your life has been changed because of a meaningful and powerful story that was shared with you from somebody else. That's why we're here today. And so let's look at this together this morning. If it's the story, we're going to unpack this in a couple different ways. We're going to look this morning at a story of a character who wants something, and we're going to look at this character who wants something and having to overcome conflict in order to get it. This is the story that we're going to unpack this morning. What do you want in your life? What do you want in your life? Maybe it's to graduate. Maybe it's to get that promotion. Maybe it's to go to live out your retirement deeper and fuller. Maybe it's to have a more meaningful relationship with God. What do you want in your life? And let me ask you this question in connection to that. Does what you want matter in your life? Does what you want matter in the world around you? If you get that thing that you want so badly, you get that thing that you've been pursuing so hard in your life, what changes? Or who changes because of it? Who changes because you get that thing that you want in your life? Does anything change? Does anyone change because you attained that thing that you want in your life? And are you willing to overcome conflict in order to get that thing that you want in your life? Because we want a lot of things in our lives, right? And our story would tell that. We want a lot of different things. And so we work, we sacrifice, we work longer hours, we put in more time, we put in more effort towards it in order to get that thing that we want. So what do you want, and what are you willing to overcome in order to get it? We're going to look at this through the life of Paul in the book of Acts. We're going to look at this at Paul. And Paul has an interesting story. If you know about him, his story starts off rough, right? Like he doesn't have a good, clean, hey, grew up in church, everything's good story. Like historians say it this way about Paul's life. One historian says, in all of the history of Christianity, no single conversion to Christ carried with it such momentous results to the whole world as that of Saul the persecutor and afterwards Paul the apostle. Another said it this way. He said that the conversion of Paul was one of the most important events in the entire course of Christianity. The conversion of Paul and Paul's life carries with it a lot of weight. And so just to bring everybody up to speed so we're all on the same page, Paul was called Saul before he had an interaction with our Lord on the road to Damascus. And so his goal in life, professionally in the early years of his life, was to travel around and to find Christians and to persecute and kill them. That was his goal in life. That's what he was all about, and this is what he did. He would go out, he would find them, he would kill them for their faith. And so he finds himself on the road to Damascus, and he has a conversion experience when he meets the Lord. He speaks with God there on that road, and this changes the direction of his life from there going forward. Paul is first a killer of Christians, then he becomes an apostle, a preacher, a missionary, telling people around the area about Jesus. And so he heads to Jerusalem to visit some Christians there, and he wants to share with other believers what had happened to him. And we're going to pick this up, Acts chapter 21, starting in verse 17. This is what happens. It says, "When we reached Jerusalem, the brothers welcomed us gladly. The following day, Paul went in with us to James, and all the elders were present. After greeting them, he related in detail what God did among the Gentiles through his ministry. When they heard it, they glorified God and said, 'You see, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are who have believed, and they are all zealous for the law.'" And so James in this story, I don't know if you made this connection or not, but James is the brother of Jesus here. So the James being talked about here is the brother of Jesus. And he's a leader in the church in Jerusalem. Paul comes into the scene, and he's sharing with people what has happened in his life, how he's had this interaction with God on this road. His life is changed, and people's lives are being changed because Paul is telling his story. And so what does Paul do? If you keep reading down through these verses, he goes into the temple in Jerusalem. That is a bad idea. Remember his history, right? Remember who he was. Paul goes walking into the temple. This is a bad idea because the sight of Paul now, who used to be on their side, who used to be going out and killing Christians and persecuting Christians, And now he's changed teams. It's like when a Broncos player goes to play for the Raiders, right? Like it's bad. And you don't want to walk into that situation, but Paul walks into the temple in Jerusalem there, and they start losing their minds. They can't handle him being there with them in that place. And so Jews start grabbing him, they start beating him, and as they are beating Paul, the religious leaders are watching this. And they're watching this unfold. Now understand kind of the politics of it. The religious leaders are not necessarily in charge. Rome is in charge. But Rome basically does whatever the religious leaders want because they are the kind of the ones that are on scene there. They have a lot of influence with the people. So the religious leaders are watching this, and so the Romans come in and they arrest Paul, and they're starting to take him off to jail. And the commander who's hauling Paul off, he grabs Paul. They're taking him down, and Paul says, "Hey, let me have a minute. Let me just say something to everybody here. Let me just tell you all something. Let me just share my story." And they grant him this opportunity to share with them. And Paul tells his story. Let's read this. Let's jump up to chapter 22, and let's read what Paul says here, because this is so impactful. Starting in verse 3, it says this. He continued, "I am a Jewish man born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, and educated according to the strict view of our patriarchal law. Being zealous for God, just as all of you are today, I persecuted this way." That's the Christians, that's the believers. The way is what they were called. "I persecuted this way to the death, binding and putting both men and women in jail, as both the high priest and the whole council of elders can testify about me. After I received letters from them to the brothers, I traveled to Damascus to bring those who were prisoners there to be punished in Jerusalem." Let's continue on. As I was traveling near Damascus, about noon, an intense light from heaven suddenly flashed around me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" I answered, "Who are you, Lord?" And he said to me, "I am Jesus the Nazarene, the one you are persecuting." Now those who were with me saw the light, but they did not hear the voice of the one who was speaking to me. Then I said, "What should I do, Lord?" And the Lord said to me, "Get up and go into Damascus, and there you will be told about everything that is assigned for you to do." Since I couldn't see because of the brightness of the light, I was led by the hand of those who were with me and came into Damascus. Someone named Ananias, a devout man according to the law, having a good reputation with all the Jews residing there, came and stood by me and said, "Brother Saul, regain your sight." And in that very hour I looked up and saw him. And then he said, "The God of our fathers has anointed you to know his will, to see the righteous one, and to hear the sound of his voice. For you will be a witness for him to all people of what you have seen and heard. And now, why delay? Get up and be baptized and wash away your sins by calling on his name." And after I came back to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple complex, I went into a visionary state and saw him telling me, "Hurry and get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me." But I said, "Lord, they know that in synagogue after synagogue I had those who believed in you imprisoned and beaten. And then the blood of your witness Stephen was being shed. I was standing by and approving, and I guarded the clothes of those who killed him." And then he said to me, "Go, because I will send you far away to the Gentiles." Paul had the opportunity in this moment to share this story, his story with these people. I mean, they're standing on the steps of the jail here in this moment, and Paul's getting to share his story. There's a few elements here that I want to bring out that make this story impactful, I think, for all of us, that maybe we can learn from a little bit. The first one is this: every story needs a character. Every story needs a character. I mean, look back at verse 3 if you have your Bibles open. He goes into who he is. This is who he is. He tells about who he is. He's a Jewish man. He was born in this city. He was brought up in the law. He was educated. This is who he is. And then he goes into what he has done. I mean, skim through verse 4 and verse 5. He tells about what he has done. In order to share your story, you need to know who you are. In order to share your story, you need to know who you are. Church, do you know who you are this morning? Do you know who you are? Because our identity gives us power. And what we put our identity in gives us power. This is what fuels our story. I don't know if you know anybody who has ever struggled with amnesia before. I don't know if you've ever interacted with them, but extreme cases of amnesia can be kind of a scary thing to watch sometimes. Amnesia basically is a medical disorder where people can't remember very much about their lives. Victims of amnesia can't remember their names, they can't remember addresses, they can't remember who they are even. They have really nothing to base their life off of. They're just kind of a shell going through the motions. They don't know anything about themselves. And sometimes I think it's easy for us to kind of look at amnesia and think, man, that would kind of be nice, right? Like it would be nice to have amnesia and forget about things in the past, right? Anybody there with me? Like you want to just kind of forget certain parts of your past. Like wouldn't it be nice to clear the slate, to wipe things out and just forget forever like that? That would be a good thing for some of us. And we would love to like walk away from certain parts of our lives, certain problems, certain situations that we've gone through and just not remember them, right? Like a new identity equals like no more messed up marriage. A new identity would be like no more rebellious kids, no more in-laws. Really, that's it? Okay. No more ex. No more bills sent to collectors. No more history of bad choices. No more daddy issues. But when we really embrace that, like if you play that out in your mind a little bit, if you really take that on, it also means no more purpose in your life because you have no identity. You have no identity for yourself. Amnesia is not a blessing, it's a curse for people. Do you know who you are? If you don't know who you are, then you probably don't know how you got here or why you got here. A number of years ago in Honolulu, a man was found on the beach. He had amnesia, that was for certain. They thought that his name was William, and so they started interacting with William, but William couldn't remember anything. He could kind of remember some things back like pre-1980 in his life, but he couldn't really remember much, and what he did tell was very kind of wishy-washy and uncertain. They tried to find out more through some things like, searching his fingerprints, but they really couldn't find out much about William. And people who interacted with him, like he just had this kind of blank stare on his face. He was a good-looking guy, well built, but he had just a blank stare on his face because he didn't even know who he was. His life was, he was really lifeless. He was hopeless. He didn't have a point to his life. He didn't have a purpose to his life. And sometimes I wonder if we walk around in our lives like this, without a point, without a purpose, without hope. Do you know who you are? When you know who you are, it changes everything. And it gives us purpose for our lives. We need to remember who we are. Who am I? I'm a Christian. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a son. I'm a friend. I'm a minister. These are things that I am. These are the purposes behind what I do. I make mistakes, and we all make mistakes. I make bad decisions. I may not know everything, but I know why I am on this planet. I know why God has me here. Do you know why you're here, and do you remember who you are? Like, do you really remember who you are? Because think about it. Throughout the Bible, God tries to give us a clear sense of who we are by consistently reminding us of this, right? Like time and time again, we are reminded of who we are. Think about it. Genesis, he says things like, we are made in his image. You're an image bearer of God. You're a child of God. Think about the Psalms. We are a sheep. He is our shepherd. Think about the Gospel of John. Christ was given as a sacrifice for us. This is what identifies us. This is our purpose. This is who we are. Why does God constantly remind us? Because we forget, right? Because sometimes we forget who we are. Because sometimes in the busyness, in the struggle, In the difficulty of life, we forget who we are, and yet God continues to remind us. Sometimes we get hurt, and sometimes we forget. Sometimes trials bog us down. Sometimes we lose ourselves in the midst of struggles. But God continues to remind us of our identity. And this is powerful. This should be so powerful for us. Too many people think that they are just products of change. Too many people think that they're just products of change, like some slimy substance like developed and morphed into what we are now when we are just here by chance. Like too many people decide to resort to things like suicide because they don't know who they are. Church, you have to remember who you are. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. Don't forget that. You're a divine reflection of God. Don't forget that. You were created with a purpose. Don't forget that. Too many people are convinced that we are here just to eat, sleep, work, and be merry, and that's just about it. And we lose sight of why we are here in the midst of the daily grind, in the midst of going through the motions. Sometimes we have forgotten about the dreams that we've had and the passions that we've had. Life just kind of becomes mundane sometimes, full of bills, full of appointments, full of keeping up with the schedule. Too many believers are convinced that our purpose maybe is just not to make God angry. Like maybe you think that like our existence here is just to kind of follow God the best we can and not make him upset. Like don't do things wrong, and he's just kind of waiting there for us to mess up so he can smack us. And in a sense, you're freed from sin, but you're also living in bondage of this improper understanding of God. Church, we need to remember who we are. We need to remember who God created us to be. We are not created to be destroyed, but to be enjoyed. We are not accidents, but created with a purpose. We are not worthless. We are priceless. There is not an amount that can be put on us. And William from Honolulu, who lost his identity, come to find out he's not actually William, he's Philip. And he's getting better at it, and there is hope for him, and because there's hope for people like him, there's also hope for us. Every good story needs a character. But that's just not it. Every good story needs to go further than that. Secondly, every good story needs a character who wants something. Every good story needs a character who wants something. What did Paul want? Think about Paul's life here. What did Paul want? He wanted to share his story. He wanted to find salvation, and he wanted to share this salvation with other people. I mean, look at verse 15 there again. This is what Paul said. He said, "For you will be a witness for him to all people of what you have seen and what you have heard." This is his story. This is what he wanted. You can be a witness to everyone with what you have seen and what you have heard. So much of what we want in life probably isn't good for us, right? Like probably most of what we want in life, the things that we really strive after, aren't good for us, or at least they just don't last, right? We work hard to get what we want, but it dies off, it gets ruined, it goes away, like it just doesn't last. I would love for you to desire above everything else a closer relationship with God. That's something that doesn't die off. That doesn't have an expiration date. That lasts. Seek him out, to be a witness for him, telling firsthand knowledge of him. Are you willing to spend a little extra time in your life, sacrificing maybe a little bit more to help somebody get closer to Jesus because of your story? Are you willing to work on that relationship? We should be so close that when people see us, they see and hear Jesus. We should be so close to God that when people see us and when people interact with us, they see a picture of who Jesus is. And so every good story needs a character. Every good story needs a character who wants something, but that's not even it still. Every good story needs a character who wants something and is able to overcome something to get it. Every good story needs a character who is willing to overcome something in order to get that thing. What are you willing to overcome in your life, church? Let's look at Paul. What did he need to overcome in his life? Flip back to Acts chapter 21. Look at verse 30 and 31. This is a part of his story. It said, "The whole city was stirred up, and the people rushed together. They seized Paul, they dragged him out of the temple complex, and at once the gates were shut. And as they were trying to kill him, word went up to the commander of the regiment that all Jerusalem was in chaos. And he's released from this, and he goes out, and it happens again. And then he's released from that, and it goes out, and it happens again as well. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 21 through 28 tells about some of the things that Paul had to overcome in his life. Listen to these words that Paul says to the Corinthian church. He says, "I say this to our shame, we have been weak. But in whatever anyone dares to boast, I am talking foolishly, I also dare." Here's where he gets into it. Verse 22. "Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I'm talking like a madman. I'm a better one, with far more labors, many more imprisonments, far worse beatings, near death many times. 5 times I received 39 lashes from Jews. 3 times I was beaten with rods by Romans. Once I was stoned by my enemies. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I've spent a night and a day in the open sea. On frequent journeys, I faced dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my own people, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the open country, dangers on the sea, and dangers among false brothers. Labor and hardship, many sleepless nights, hunger and thirst, often without food, cold, and lacking clothing. Not to mention other things, there is the daily pressure on me, my care for all the churches." Paul has a lot in his story to share, doesn't he? Paul has a lot that he has overcome in his story to share. He has been in danger. And yet I look at this, and if I'm being honest, church, sometimes I think in comparison to what Paul has been through, so many kind of modern Christians are snowflakes compared to this. Aren't we? Like, if we can just be honest, what are the things that we get upset about that we feel like we're being persecuted for? Like they changed the color of my carpet in the church. What upsets us? They put paint on the wall. Paul, I've been shipwrecked. I've been flogged. I've nearly died many times. Us, the music's too loud. Music's not loud enough. Music's too new. Music's not new, and music's too old. Come on, church. This is our definition in 2019 of what it means to persevere. I think that we are missing it. If this is what it means to overcome, if this is what it means to struggle and persevere, I think we are missing it. Paul had to overcome all of these things. We don't have that struggle. We don't have to deal with that. Donald Miller talks about in one of his books sitting on a couch and watching the Tour de France on his television. And he talks about how, as he's watching this on his television, he says he was inspired to ride his bike from watching this on television. And so he goes on to tell about how, as he's sitting on his couch, he's envisioning himself racing in the Tour de France. And he's doing the motions even with his feet, like pedaling the pedals, and he's envisioning himself winning the Tour de France sitting on his couch. And then he realizes that he is, in fact, pathetic, because he's sitting on his couch imagining that he's winning the Tour de France on his bike. And so what does he do? He goes out and he buys a bicycle, and he begins to ride it in his neighborhood, and that grows to where he rides it around his city. And finally, he rode it across the country, raising money for poor families in Rwanda. This is part of his story. This is part of his story. He was inspired to do that. Church, are you willing to get off the couch? Are you willing to get off the couch? Let me tell you about Gail Grimes, because Gail Grimes was not willing to get off the couch. The headline reads like this from Florida: 480-pound woman dies after 6 years of sitting on her couch. In Florida, a woman died after a failed 6-hour attempt to dislodge her from her couch in her home. The story reads that she lived with a man named Herman, and Herman tried to take care of her as much as he could. He cleaned up after her. He tried repeatedly to get her up and off the couch, but she would just not do it. They had to remove the couch from her house with her on it because it was too painful for her to try and get off the couch, because the couch was grafted into her skin. After years, her skin was becoming one with the couch that she had been sitting on. This is a horrible story. But think about it. How many Christians have been grafted into the church pew? How many believers have been grafted into the chair that we sit in every single week? And we can kind of scoff at that and think that that's a joke, but how many of us never get up and make a more meaningful life than what it is right now? How many of us never get up and make a more meaningful story than just sitting in our chair week after week and going through the motions week after week and just continuing to do our thing week after week? I'm here. I'm challenging you. Get up out of the chair. Go make your life into a meaningful life. But here's the thing, I can't make you do it, right? And nobody can make you do it. You have to do it yourself. And so we do things like talk about Paul, hopefully to inspire us, to convict us, to challenge us, to get up out of the chair and go make a meaningful life for ourselves. Like think about Paul's life. Again and again, he keeps telling his story, and yet again and again, he goes through these struggles. He goes through these persecutions. Like chapter 22, if you were to read it, he would go out, he would share his story, they would try and get rid of him again. Then you jump up to chapter 23, Paul continues to try and share his story, and people are literally trying to tear him limb from limb. Like, this is Paul's story of him going out and trying to make a meaningful life for himself. This is no Billy Graham crusade here. I don't know if you're familiar with who Billy Graham was, but back in the day, he would have these revivals, and floods of people would come forward to accept Christ, and it would be kind of this beautiful picture, right? Well, here, Paul is out there trying to share Christ, trying to grow the kingdom, try to glorify God, and what happens to him? He tries to get beaten. He tries to get killed. They're trying to tear him apart. It's not rainbows and unicorns all the time in order to share your story, but that doesn't mean that we just don't share our story, does it? We just continue to push through it. And then if we look at, I want to point us to a verse in verse 20, in verse 11 of chapter 23 of Acts. Verse 11 of chapter 23 of Acts. This is why I think we do it. If I can get there. Here it is. It says this: the following night the Lord stood by him, meaning Paul. The Lord stood by him and said, "Have courage, for as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." That first part is so important to us. The following night the Lord stood by him. The Lord stood by him and said, "Have courage." Think about that. That's just it. Like, God was near him. God was near Paul. And when we share our stories, when we boldly stand up and proclaim Christ, God is standing there with us as well. And no matter what is going on around us, there is no better place to be in as long as God is standing there with us. We must never stop telling people about Jesus. We, us, must testify about him. We must testify about him in Cheyenne. We must testify about him in southeast Wyoming. We must testify about him in Colorado, in Nebraska, and in this country and around this world, wherever God calls us to, wherever he sends us to. No matter what the audience is, no matter what they are trying to do, we must share this story, church. We must share the story about what God has done in our lives. And what do we tell them? Well, we tell them about a character. That's us. We tell them about who we are. We tell them about our identity. We tell them about a character, and we tell them about a character who wants something. We want to go to heaven. We want to take as many people with us as possible. We want to glorify God. We want to make Jesus famous in this world. We tell them about a character. We tell them about a character who wants something, and we tell them about a character who has to overcome things in his life. Things like sin and guilt and shame and addiction. And yet we tell them about a God who stands by us. We tell them about a God who has never forsaken us, who never leaves us, and is standing there with us. Here's an opening line for all of you. I hope this is something that you want for your life and for our lives. The opening line goes like this: once upon a time, there were some Christians in Cheyenne who decided it was time for a new story. We don't know how that story ends yet. We're in the midst of living it out right now, but I want to go on this journey with you. I want to tell this story with you. I'm not asking you to do it alone. I'm not asking you to go out and live this by yourself. We do this together. We do this for a purpose. We do this for a story. Let's go share our story, and let's make Jesus famous in this world. Amen? Heavenly Father, I'm so thankful for this church, and I'm so thankful for the opportunity that we get every week to be here, to worship you, to open your word. And God, I pray that this would not just be a motion that we go through, but God, I pray that we would desire our stories to be meaningful, to be impactful for other people around us, so that more people can be drawn to you, more people can find salvation through you and in you. Father, I'm so thankful for Jesus. Thank you for what he did for us on the cross. I'm thankful for Paul and the story of his life that we get to tell over and over again, and the example that he set of consistently throughout his life making you famous regardless of what was going on around him. God, give us the strength and the courage to go out and to make that story our story, to go out and tell that story of what you have done in our lives to other people around us. We thank you. We love you. It's in Jesus' name. Amen.